Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have back with us Leslie Hammock, who's the founder of Retire by Design, and we'll be talking about sequence of return. Leslie, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be here. Good morning.
I know that sometimes people, in certain industries, they use acronyms or words or phrases that they've used for 30 years. And then people that have never heard of it before goes, what is that? And I think that sequence of return is one of those terms. So let's start off with what actually is sequence of return?
Well, let me answer that first of all by saying that there are three general phases of people's retirement planning. There's their accumulation phase. There's the preservation phase, which is right at or just before retirement, and there's the distribution phase. And sequence of returns is something that nobody talks about much. No, people don't hear about it or hardly any. I talk about it a lot in my adult financial educational workshops and webinars. But it is the fact that returns vary from year to year. You'll have some years where you have negative returns, some years you have positive returns. And depending upon where you are in your retirement phase, whether you're in your accumulation phase or whether you're in the distribution phase or the preservation phase, it can have an increasingly critical impact on the success of your retirement. So in my workshops, I use an example of two 45-year-old investors, each investing $100,000 one time at age 45 and letting the money sit there in the market and grow until age 65. One investor, Investor A, has really good returns in the early years, poor returns in the later years. Investor B is just the opposite. He has really bad returns in the early years and poor and good returns in the later years. But ironically, they end up with the same amount of money over that 20-year period of time in the accumulation phase. But when you change the parameters a little bit, using the same returns, same sequence of returns, positive and negative for each investor A and B, starting at age 65, factoring in an inflation factor, but then pulling out the same amount of money each year for retirement. The one that has really good returns early, poor returns late, never runs out of money. Investor B, who had the poor returns early in retirement and during distribution, having poor returns early and good returns later, runs out of retirement well before life expectancy. So sequence of returns can have a dramatic impact, particularly on the distribution phase in retirement.
It reminds me of some examples I've heard before, like, hey, planning retirement is like climbing a mountain. In the accumulation phase, you're striving and climbing and huffing and puffing and trying to get more money. But then when you get to the top, you go, yay. But the more important part of that equation is getting back down the mountain, which is the distribution and when do you take it and how much and required minimum and taxes. So I think that that's exactly what you're saying there is like two people with the same amount. All of a sudden, if you don't do it at the right time, you can have very different outcomes, right?
Oh yeah. And I mean, like I have clients all the time come into my office and they want to invest a certain amount of money in the market with me in a particular investment. Another will come in a month later, same thing, and wants to do the same exact investment. One's going to do a lot better than the other one just because of the timing of it. So that's exactly true. So I think it's important. It's not. I don't think so. I know it's important that one must employ a diversification in different types of securities. For example, blue chip versus high growth type stock. We all know that in a big market downturn, some stocks hold in there better than others. Some take huge losses because they're high risk, high growth stocks. We've seen that. We've all seen that rodeo. I think it's important maybe to consider different asset classes, some that are uncorrelated to the stock market. So when the market goes way down, when during some sort of crisis, as we've seen, whether it be a COVID crisis or geopolitical crisis or something else, that the uncorrelated assets do not take the same path.
Yeah.
And then there's the option of having some strategies where the downside is buffered with some sort of safety net up to a point, or there's zero downside risk, which minimizes your upside, but you have zero downside risk. You cannot lose money.
Yeah.
And I think everything I just talked about, all have a place in someone's portfolio, particularly in the distribution phase.
It makes me think too. I've heard this type of calculation before, and we don't need to get into the weeds of it, but just the concept. If your portfolio took a hit of, let's just pick 20% in one year, the next year people might think, oh, I just need to see my portfolio raise 20% to get back to ground zero. And that's not the case. You need well above 20% if you lost 20%. So when you get to that certain stage of, coming back down the mountain in distribution, you've got to be so careful with any kind of money you have at risk or losses in the market, because you don't have the time to regain it, because you need more to get back to ground zero than it was that you took the hit on. So I think that's something that people, need to think about when they go, oh yeah, I've got some time, but do you?
That's right. And in my workshops, I use the example of Mount Everest. Mount Everest is notoriously known for having cost the lives of a lot of climbers over many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the deaths occurred on the way down after they reached the peak, i.e. in the distribution phase and retirement. What we've seen in more recent years is the number of deaths have come down a good bit. For one primary reason, they took a guide with them to help them get, by the way, not only up the mountain, but back down Mount Everest to avoid coming down the wrong way and meeting failure. And I think that's the same application as far as your planning in retirement in dealing with an advisor.
Yep.
I think it'd be helpful.
I think that's we've said it many times before, but don't make decisions on your own. Don't assume don't Google for knowledge. Get with someone that can sit down with you and put decades of their experience in with your specific plan, because not one plan benefits every single person out there. Everyone's different. And it makes me think of this just again in general terms. At some point, at some age, shouldn't people be looking at kind of redistributing their retirement funds from the volatility of money in the market, where they might have those drops, into certain products that might help maybe lessen that sequence risk? Like some of those ones where it's like, oh, this one is guaranteed income of X%, so we don't need to worry if the market dips.
Well, I think that, and I point out to people that I think it's important to cover your known obligations, your known expenses, with a guaranteed stream of income coming from a source. You know it's going to come when you need it, as you need it, on time, every time. That frees up the rest of your money to keep in the market as a hedge against inflation, and be more aggressive with it when you've got your main basis covered,
mm-hmm.
which is what you're trying to say, Mike.
Yeah. And what percent should be in this, that, and the other? Again, we don't know, but you should be at a point at a certain age where 100% of your money is not in the market of being impacted by risk of volatility. And should you hear, what you just said there and go, oh, well, if that's the case, I'm going to put all my money into whatever product. Of course not. You need to have good distribution and good, mix there. And so I think that's a big thing for people to think about is I know that big point you're making of sequence of return, like, ooh, I must take money out of our retirement account for whatever need, whether it's the required minimum distribution the government makes, or whether it's because I need, money for long-term care, like we've talked about before. What if you're forced to do that and the market is in a downturn? Well, then you've got a double whammy hitting you. So just being aware of this.
Yes, you've got double diminishing of your assets.
Yeah.
If you're having to take distributions when your portfolio is down, it has a double negative effect. And that's what happened to investor B in my sequence of returns example I talked about earlier, where bad returns early in your retirement are I call it the retirement red zone. Retirement red zone is 5 years before your retirement up to 5 years after your retirement. Those are the most dangerous times to be have had heavy losses in your portfolio in the red zone, either right before or right after retirement. It can literally destroy your retirement income, and you can run the risk of running out of money if you live a long time.
And like we've said before, having these kind of conversations with a professional well ahead of when anything were to, pop up helps you to respond versus react. Because if you're in the midst of a crisis, you're making decisions under pressure. Whereas if you knew that, okay, if this happens, we're going to do the following, then you're like, okay, hey, Leslie told me that this could happen, so now we're going to follow that plan. So having that plan in place, knowing that that sequence of return is a thing and could really negatively impact retirement income, you just need to have a plan in place to manage that.
Yes, one of the roles as an advisor is trying to keep our clients from making emotional decisions.
Yeah,
that's usually when they make the worst decisions. This is when they're spooked or their emotions are running high, and they're in a mode of survival, thinking in their head. They'll make decisions that they'll regret down the road. That's what we try to help our clients avoid.
Well, I tell you, Leslie, this has been really helpful to get our heads wrapped around a good, clear description of what sequence of return is and some of the ways that people can plan for it. If someone is interested in sitting down with you and understanding for their own retirement portfolio what that could impact them and have a good, proper plan, what's the best way that they can reach out and connect with you?
Thank you, Mike. They can reach us at 478-329-0339. Start to give you my cell phone number. 478-329-0339, or email me at Leslie, Leslie, at retirebydesign.com.
Excellent. And we'll make sure that your link to your website is in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for coming back on, Leslie. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you.
I've enjoyed it. Have a nice day.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.